Ladies and gentlemen, welcome live to the Victoria and Albert Museum and the grand finale of the David Bowie Is exhibition. Please welcome the exhibition curators and your hosts for this evening, Geoffrey Marsh and Victoria Brokes.
Good evening and welcome to David Bowie Is Happening Now, live from the Victoria and Albert Museum in London. We're here tonight with 70 guests at the heart of the groundbreaking David Bowie Is exhibition, which opened in March. It's been a phenomenal success and the fastest selling exhibition in the museum's history. Over 300,000 people have seen the exhibition to date, and tonight we're joined with 20,000 more live in cinemas across the country, from Truro in Cornwall to the Eden Theatre in Inverness in the north of Scotland.
Yes, this really is the grand finale, the last chance before it leaves these shores and embarks on a world tour. And so it's the last time you can see those costumes, lyrics and photographs that came to us courtesy of the David Bowie archive. And it's the first time any institution has had access to that treasure trove of personal artefacts.
The Victoria and Albert Museum, the V&A, is the national collection exploring the history of art, design and performance. Over his career, David has fused all three with style and flair. So doing a major exhibition about David was a natural choice for the museum. When the museum was founded in 1852, it celebrated contemporary culture. And at every stage over the 6 decades of David's career, he's been at the cutting edge of artistic performance. So what better time, 50 years after he left school in July 1963, to celebrate his extraordinary achievements and to look in a bit more detail at his working methods.
The title of the exhibition, David Bowie Is, poses the question, what is David Bowie? And our approach in the exhibition has been to leave that question open, to highlight the fact that there is no single answer. It also invites consideration of Bowie's own belief that we all inhabit many different identities, and of course he means different things to different people, and that includes all of you watching tonight.
And not only are we taking you on the ultimate tour of the exhibition tonight, we'll be joined by a range of special guests who will give their personal stories, insights and recollections, all from different walks of life, writers, musicians, artists and the general public. But they all regard David as a continual source of inspiration, an inspiration we hope will inspire you as you travel through the exhibition.
We're right at the beginning of the exhibition here. And this is a rice sculpture that we commissioned specially for the exhibition, and it represents everybody born in the UK in 1947, because that was a peak year for births, because millions of troops had returned from the war. So one of these grains of rice represents David Bowie, or David Jones as he was then. But if you think about it, there'd have been quite a lot of these grains of rice who were also called David Jones. And so you get that story of somebody who was born with quite an ordinary name, quite ordinary beginnings, who's going to go on to become somebody quite extraordinary. And in amongst these grains of rice, there's also Mark Feld, who became Mark Bolan, Sandra Goodrich, who became Sandy Shaw, and Reg Dwight, who became Elton John. And then over here, we actually have Bowie as a baby, aged 10 months. He's completely adorable. And this is the earliest object from the archive, and it just hints at how complete that archive is.
Well, of course, David grew up in London, just north of Bromley. London was still quite a grey place, it was still very badly bombed, and there was still rationing until 1953. Here's a kind of ration book, and in fact, bread was rationed after the war, when it hadn't been during the war, so there was that downside. But on the upside, there were a lot of changes as well. This is the coronation coach from Queen Elizabeth. The Labour government was pioneering the welfare state, the National Health Service, education for all, a new look Britain. And as the 50s got on, there was more money and a teenage lifestyle grew up. And I suppose best summarised in Colin McInnes's famous novel, Absolute Beginners, 1959, as it says on the cover here, looking inside the teenage world of coffee bars, motor scooters and jazz clubs. And it was that excitement of central London, I think, began to appeal to David, stuck down in the rather tedious suburbs in southeast London.
Well, I think one of the things that's important to remember about that time is that South London and the suburbs, Bromley, Beckenham, Penge, all of that, it had really been smashed up after the war. I think it's really important to remember the trauma of the 40s, the 50s, and it still really went on until the mid-60s. It was really wretched down there. And it was very, very boring. I think the boredom was really important. After all, our parents had lived through all that bombing.
Probably the most interesting thing of all is this photograph of Little Richard representing the arrival of rock and roll, not just through live performance, but through films like The Girl Can't Help It. And David bought this, I think, at a local Woolworths when he was 9 or 10, about 1956, 57. And this is really the starting point of David Bowie's musical interest.
Woke up this morning, Lucy was not in sight. I asked my friends about her, but all they did was tight.
David was really inspired by the excitement of Little Richard as an entertainer. But also because he had this fantastic brass section, famously Lee Allen on tenor sax, superb player. And I think through Little Richard, and obviously also Elvis Presley as well, Bowie began to think about the excitement of being an entertainer and I suppose ultimately becoming a star.
I thought, well, here I am. I'm a bit sort of mixed up creatively. I've got all these things going I like doing at once on stage or whatever. Why am I doing any of these things anyway? And I realised it was because I wanted to be well known and that I wanted to be thought of as somebody who was the instigator of new ideas. I wanted to turn people onto new things and new perspectives.
It's all got to stop. They've had enough. The worms are turning. The rebellion of the long hairs is getting underway. A 17-year-old, David Jones, has just founded the Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Long-Haired Men.
I think we're all fairly tolerant, but for the last 2 years we've had comments like "darling" and "can I carry a handbag" thrown at us. And I think it's just had to stop now.
So this is the first time that we see works in Bowie's own hand. And I can't tell you how exciting it was to find in the archive that it wasn't just the things you might expect, like fabulous costumes from when he was famous or photographs by famous photographers. But who keeps their teenage sketches? Well, luckily for us, Bowie did. And they give us real insight into what's going to come later. So Bowie actually passed the 11+, but he didn't go to the grammar school. He went instead to Bromley Technical College, and there he was able to focus on arts and music. And in that time, he joined several bands. And he was clearly very aware, right from then, of the need for effective self-promotion and a really strong visual identity. So each of them received a makeover. This is the Delta Lemons, where he's designed a costume. Here we've got the Bowmen, who have a sort of Wild West look about them. But here, for the Conrads, which lasted a little longer, he's even designing a stage set. Most boys would be happy just to get a gig, but for Bowie that's not enough. He's thinking beyond that. He's fusing music and theatre already. And then over here we have a photograph of him. He's only 16 here, but he looks so composed, and you can feel he's almost imagining himself as a star already.
I would often buy books that were far above my head, but as long as one that I could put them in my pocket so the title would show. When I was on the subway, you know, I could look deep. But actually, these things kind of made their mark because I found out that I'd actually end up reading them.
All this wild, hectic experience was squeezed into only 2 or 3 years.
Well, I remember being at school, and I remember we used to go and look at pictures, and there's a picture of Bowie up there, and one of the teachers saying, you know, if you misbehave, you'll end up like that rat. But, of course, we worshipped him.
When I live my dream, I'll take you with
And we had the same art teacher who was still there then, Peter Frampton's dad, or known at the school, of course, as Mr. Frampton. So we knew Bowie had been there, and we knew that Bowie had got out, that he'd become a pop star, that it was possible to be a kid like we were in the suburbs and get out.
maybe I'll slay a dragon for
I
you.
mean, we were brought up to be clerks. We were brought up to work in the civil service. You know, we were brought up really to be nobodies. The dream was that you could lead a creative life. I think that's why Bowie was inspirational for us, because lower middle-class boys like us could have interesting lives.
I will live my dream.
Well, I think for many visitors, this is one of the most extraordinary survivals in the exhibition. It's the original letter written by Ralph Horton, who worked with David, to Ken Pitt, who was David's first proper manager, recording his change of name. And if you look, it says, "Dear Ken, may I say that I enjoyed our meeting the other day, and it was indeed a pleasure to be introduced to you. I've taken the liberty of writing to you and advising you that I've now changed David's name to David Bowie." And that's the correct pronunciation. He named it himself after the Bowie knife. And that's the 17th of September, 1965. We've got 3 exhibits here. 1967, which is a crucial year in David's development. This is his first album that came out. Extraordinarily, he had an album made before he even had a hit single, but unfortunately, it was issued on the same day, the 1st of June 1967, as the Beatles brought out Sgt. Pepper, probably the worst day in history to bring out an album. And it's very interesting comparing the look. David's got this rather clean-cut kind of mod image with a military jacket, and then you come down to the Beatles and look at what they're wearing. They're wearing military jackets, but how different. Multicoloured, in this extraordinary creation of Peter Blake, almost psychedelic, crowded with these cut-out figures. And of course, when you look at this image on here really looks rather old-fashioned. Just to show some of the extraordinary influences that David was picking up then, this is an acetate of the Velvet Underground and Nico, which was given to David's manager by Andy Warhol in the factory in New York. In fact, it's got Warhol's name on there. Ken Pitt brought this back to London in January 1967 and gave it to David, who was fascinated with the music of the Velvet Underground, the subject matter, the subversiveness of it. So David had heard the Velvet Underground before the record was even released in the United States. So it gives some idea about how up-to-date he was with trends right across the Atlantic. And then moving over here, you've got this extraordinary image of David as a mime artist. And you compare this with this, and you think, what on earth's going on? Well, the key thing was, in August 1967, he'd met Lindsay Kemp. Lindsay Kemp, how do you describe him? He was a dancer, choreographer, kind of artist total, lived this extraordinary bohemian existence in Soho. And he and Bowie really hit it off. And I think Lindsay Kemp really taught David that if you're on stage and you imagine that you're somewhere and you can project yourself strongly enough, you can be anywhere. And that was the start of David moving away from his mod phase into thinking about characterization. And of course, they're the sort of things that occurred with Ziggy and Aladdin Sane and everything in the 1970s.
The big struggle was wondering whether I should try and be me, or if I couldn't cope with that, then make up some people, and would I be them easier? And it was much easier to be somebody else, so I was somebody else, and then it worked better.
Home, and I happened to glance in the window of this junk shop, and there it was. I took it to the pub.
Oh, bravo, bravo. What a wag.
It soon got around. Everyone knew. Then it was the local concert. Autographs, films, television, the lot. Had a very strange effect on me, though. I didn't notice, of course, until that night at the London Palladium. The papers made a big thing out of it.
Strangled on stage, they said.
Funny, though, they didn't mention anything about a mask.
Coming into this sort of first room in the exhibition is absolutely fascinating.
How amazing that he was saving every single thing to do with himself when he was still a kid.
The more obscure objects are the things that you connect with much better because it feels like you've got a more personal connection with Bowie.
There's a sketch over there that David Bowie did, David Jones did, of his mother in 1963, which is an extraordinary thing.
It's so hard to think of Bowie as having once been a 10-month-old Bonnie baby. It just grounds him.
So very interesting to see his early days and the soil from which he grew.
What's the name? What's the name?
As you've just seen, music and performance are at the very centre of our story, and we knew we needed to find a way to convey their magic and integrate film and sound fully. We wanted you to feel almost as if you'd entered a Bowie world. So to do that, we worked with theatre designers 59 Productions and the audio company Sennheiser to create a completely immersive, multi-story, multi-sensory experience. And alongside Bowie's work, we placed V&A objects in order to put Bowie's music, image and ideas into the context of wider 20th century movements in art, design and culture. Now, next in the exhibition, we're going to explore the pivotal moment when Bowie makes the transition from little-known artist to mainstream pop star.
So we wanted to make a big display about Bowie's first hit single, Space Oddity, in 1969. Bowie was growing up and developing his career in the 60s at the height of the Cold War, the great rivalry between America and the West and Russia. Space Oddity, of course, is nowadays associated with the moon landing, but that's not quite how it originated. Coming over here, this was a photograph taken by Apollo 8, printed in colour in the Times newspaper in January 1969. As they came round from behind the back of the moon, the astronauts saw this extraordinary sight of the blue planet, Earth, across the barren wasteland of the moon. And this was the first time ever that human beings had seen the blue planet. Up to that time, of course, everybody thought it was green. And within a few days, David had written Space Oddity, Planet Earth is blue and there's nothing I can do. And in July, when the moon landing took place, it was re-recorded and used as the theme music by the BBC. And on the back of that, it went to number 5, and he was on his way to superstardom.
This is ground control to Major Tom. You've really made the grade. And the papers want to know whose shirt you wear. Now it's time to leave the capsule if you dare. This is Major Tom to ground control. I'm stepping through the door, and I'm floating in a most peculiar way. And the stars look very different today. Here am I floating round my tin can, far above the world. Planet Earth is blue, and there's nothing I can do.
We were really excited to find in the archive the original design that Bowie did for the back of the Space Oddity album, which was then worked up for him by his old school friend, George Underwood. And you can see here how closely he controls every visual aspect of what he's producing. And the figures on here represent things that were interesting to Bowie at the time. So there's a figure of a Buddha there, there's a spaceman here. And up here, there's Hermione Farthingale, who was his ex-band member and soon-to-be ex-girlfriend.
Then the visitors are fascinated by looking at David's handwriting and by all the crossings out and the rewritings that you can see.
Wake up, you sleepy head. Put on some clothes, shake up your bed. Put another log on the fire for me. I made some breakfast and coffee. Look out my window, what do I see? A crack in the sky and a hand reaching down to me. All the nightmares came today. And it looked looks as though they're here to stay.
And I think when you look at them, they also show his interest at the time. A lot of it's about sort of rather dystopian future. We've got 5 years left to cry in. The Earth was really dying. And I think it's interesting asking where these ideas were coming from and looking at the influences on David. And I think going back a few years into the sort of mid-1960s when he was 17 or 18, that was a period when people really got interested in these ideas of trying to get inside your mind, whether it's through drugs. Got to remember that LSD was legal until the end of 1966, whether it's through sex or through exploring Eastern religions. David himself had been interested in becoming a Buddhist in 1967. And I think coming out of that, what these lyrics show is that David's looking to the...
On the screen was probably life-changing.
I just remember hearing my father saying, "Who the hell is that? Is it a man or is it a woman?" I wasn't quite sure.
There's Bowie in this kind of skin-tight lyrics jumpsuit with this red hair, putting his arm round another man.
In them days was not really the done thing.
You weren't allowed to like men with makeup in those days.
And this is primetime TV.
So we show it here in this mirrored room to represent the idea that when he sang, "I wanted to call someone, so I picked on you," he was actually talking to all of us.
Had to phone someone, so...
And when he looked down the television screen and pointed at that 12-year-old boy, which was me, I thought I'd been, spoken to through the television set.
He's almost here in this costume now, and he's pointing at me.
Bowie had asked his friend and tailor and sometimes singer Freddie Boretti to design something taking inspiration from A Clockwork Orange, the Stanley Kubrick film, but he wanted it without the violence in something like Liberty Fabrics. And so Freddie Boretti came up with this fabulously colourful two-piece costume that you see behind me. And this represents for us a couple of important themes in the exhibition. The first is how Bowie's own radical individualism has been a catalyst for freedom of expression amongst his fans. And the second is the way in which Bowie absorbs ideas from the world around him and then introduces them in his own innovative way.
Let the children choose it, let all the children boogie.
I mean, 40 years is a long time, but it feels like yesterday. And it's all I can do to stop myself from going and touching it because it's such an iconic costume. It's wonderful.
What's the name? What's the name?
All artists take their ideas from the world around them, but few spread the net so wide or create something so new with what they find. Bowie's creative influences span 20th century cultural history, from German expressionism to theatre of cruelty. Collaboration has always been key to Bowie's creative process. One of his great talents is finding exactly the right person at the right time. And throughout his career, he's had an exceptional ability to anticipate and influence future trends. One of his most famous collaborations was with a fashion designer responsible for some of his most iconic outfits. It was a partnership that would take Bowie in a completely new direction. This designer created the legendary Ziggy Stardust and Aladdin Sane costumes displayed around me, and I'm delighted to say he's with us tonight all the way from Tokyo, Japan. Please welcome Kansai Yamamoto.
Thank you, Vicky. How can I say? Wow. 40 years ago, it was 1971. I had a show in London. In that time, producer's name called Yasuko. After 2 years later, she is working for David Bowie, okay? And one night, I got phone call from New York around 12 o'clock in the midnight. And she said, now New York becomes completely crazy and strong or something like that. And she said, Kansai, you should come immediately to New York. From midnight until tomorrow morning, 5 o'clock, she pushed me. Finally, I decided I should go to New York. And I changed all my schedule. I was there, and I arrived in New York, direct to Radio City Music Hall. I was sitting at the first row. Around Music City Hall, there are so many young and strong, crazy and fantastic people are together, okay? From the first row, I am watching when show going to start. Show began. From the ceiling, he was come down with very huge mirror ball. At that time, I didn't know what is he going to wear. This clothes was this one. I designed this clothes for ladies. But he selected ladies' clothes. And also, this clothes, we say, black jumpsuit, going to like front and back immediately. It's called, in Kabuki, we say, hikinuki. After this costume appeared. Understand? So it means when he's coming, wow, he is wearing my design for ladies. I really felt I had full of tears because my soul and his soul was united. Okay? And as soon as he changed from this clothes to that clothes, all the New Yorkers stand up and shouting, screaming. I have no vocabulary enough. You know, I never seen like that before. So after that, we become good friends. Of course, I visited backstage. 1 second. Well, when I was in Tokyo, about this program, asking me how to make relationship between David Bowie and Kansai. Now I speak a little bit better English, but 40 years ago, my English is very poor. How can I make communication with him? But we went to many places in Tokyo, in Kyoto, New York, London, everywhere. You know, I don't know how to make a communication. Maybe our soul felt it together, and I got a lot of influence. Finally, I would like to say, when I hear his music, newest one, new album, he is spending his own life. Me either. Bowie is Bowie. Kansai is Kansai. I'm very happy to be here, and thank you very much, everybody.
Stinking weather, fat, shaking hand, dopey morning, dot grumpy nose. Little wonder then, little wonder, you little wonder, you. Big screen dolls, hits and explosions, sleepy time, fastball with you. Little wonder then, little wonder, you little wonder, you. Stinking weather, fat, shaking hand.
Well, this is Bowie's famous Union Jack outfit, which he's shown on the cover of Earthling album of 1997, which he designed in collaboration with Alexander McQueen. I think it shows three really interesting things. First of all, it's based around a traditional 18th century gentleman's coat, the sort of thing a landowner would wear striding across his estate. But it's been mixed up with a Union Jack design, which is obviously very popular with designers of British pop music. And then thirdly, it's got this extraordinary punk aesthetic, because it's actually been burnt all the way over with cigarette burns and tears, so that you have the Union Jack chopped up and burnt. So that extraordinary combination of tradition and radicalism put together. So Bowie came up with this idea, but he obviously needed someone to realise it. And McQueen had been a couple of years out of college, but was famous for the quality of his tailoring. And so Bowie went to this relatively unknown designer at this time, who could do the tailoring necessary to keep the Union Jack working and flowing, but also the beautiful cut of the trousers. And so together they came up with this really extraordinary and iconic piece, which is, I think, one of the most popular of the costumes in the exhibition with our visitors.
So Bowie once said he felt more like an actor than a rock star when he got up on stage, and this area brings together for the very first time some of the many characters that Bowie's created and performed. And we've got here some really intriguing notes for perhaps his most famous character, Ziggy Stardust. And you can see that he's imagining him as a counterculture figure. It says he's against the system. And there's a reference to parents here that I think really takes you back to the early 70s and that time when pop music was for young people and not something that everyone listened to. And when Bowie rose to stardom as Ziggy Stardust in the early 70s, fans were encouraged to see him and Ziggy as one and the same. He said to journalists, "Call me Ziggy Stardust." And this poster, which anticipates our exhibition title by several decades, actually says David Bowie is Ziggy Stardust. And that's why when Bowie famously killed off Ziggy in 1973 and said he'd played his last gig as Ziggy Stardust, many fans thought that that was the end of Bowie as well. And that's why we decided to display this replica Ziggy Stardust costume with original boots, lying down here as if it was in a sarcophagus, to represent this character that was so dramatically killed off by Bowie, but still is very much alive in our collective pop culture memory. And of course, the end of Ziggy wasn't the end of Bowie at all. He went on to become Halloween Jack in the Diamond Dogs tour, and the Thin White Duke in Station to Station. And then later abandoned the idea of performing as a single character, but still very much incorporated theatrical ideas into his performances. So he wore this kind of rather kitsch Hamlet meets public schoolboy look for the Serious Moonlight tour in the 80s. And then in the 90s, his One Outside album was built around a very complex story about an art crime, featuring several characters. And you can see here some of Bowie's sketches of those characters.
Making love with his ego. Ziggy sucked up into his mind.
And you'll also notice that the mannequins have masks on them, and those are casts of a life mask made from Bowie in the 70s. We wanted to get across that idea of theatre and the fact that Bowie is a man of many masks.
I think what comes across in this exhibition is the clothes are astounding.
I'm just finding it fascinating to actually see the costumes up close. These costumes that I have pored over since, you know, I was a girl.
It's almost like David was here in those personas, having the outfits there. So close I could almost touch them.
Bowie's DNA is in those costumes.
The costumes here that have this sense of flamboyancy, but also narrative of a particular time.
Everyone has got a Bowie moment they like.
70s Ziggy Stardust.
The asymmetrical knitwear.
I love those black suits. This little leather onesie painted with rabbits.
It is that Kansai Yamamoto dress.
the black PVC all in one. I mean, to actually see how it's been sewn.
I just had a little moment to myself whilst I was looking at the Thin White Duke costume. And that is probably the sexiest I think he ever looked.
It's just to be able to see outfits that you've only ever seen in the distance. I'm just blown away.
No, it's okay. I don't mind. That's great. Anything like that is great. Let's go.
We're in the song creation part of the exhibition, where we look at the process with which Bowie creates songs. And he doesn't do it in any particular order. He doesn't do the music and then the lyrics, or the lyrics and then the music. He often does it all together. But what he has done at various points through his career is introduce chance as a catalyst for creativity. This is a transcript for an interview that he did with William Burroughs in 1973. And William Burroughs introduced him to the cut-up technique. And we've got a song here from the Heroes album, Blackout, which you can see how Bowie actually used that technique to create the song. And then later in the 1970s, Brian Eno introduced him to oblique strategy cards, which is a box of cards, which Brian Eno had developed with the artist Peter Schmidt. And he used them to overcome creative blocks. And they have instructions on them like abandon normal instruments. And you just imagine being the band and being told to swap instruments, which apparently they were. It would introduce something really new and quite challenging and exciting into the mix. And later in the 1990s, he created his own computer program, the Verbicizer.
Well, it's a program that I developed with a friend of mine in San Francisco. It'll take the sentence and I'll divide it up between the columns. And then when I've got, say, 3 or 4 or 5, sometimes I go as much as 20, 25 different sentences going across here. And then I'll set it to randomize. And it'll take those 20 sentences and cut in between them all the time, picking out, choosing different words from different columns and from different rows of sentences. So what you end up with is a real kaleidoscope of meanings and topics and nouns and verbs, all sort of slamming into each other. Save. The choices that I now make from this form, I can then re-imbue it with an emotive quality if I want to, or take it as it writes itself. So, I mean, some of the things I'll empathize with terrifically, and I'll find that even maybe 4 words in here would, the top kills himself. Well, it sounds like a boss, doesn't it? And suddenly I get a vision of a boss in the 30s throwing himself out of a window, you know, in the Great Depression. That might be enough to send me off on writing a song about that. It's almost like a technological dream in its own way. It creates the images from a dream state without having to go through the boredom and going to sleep all night. Or get stoned out of your head.
What's the name? What's the name? What's the name?
David's been a huge influence on contemporary musicians and performers, and who better to discuss this than the lead singer of Pulp and cultural commentator, ladies and gentlemen, Jarvis Cocker.
Hello. Hello, yeah. Well, I wanted to talk to you a bit about David Bowie's writing. And I really do mean his writing, because you've seen it earlier on, and that was one of the things that really struck me when I came to this exhibition, was to see his handwriting, because to me, it had a bit of the look of a 14-year-old girl's handwriting. and that might sound like a daft joke or whatever, but to see like lines that you knew, like, you know, the girl with the mousy hair, Freddie's got spots from ripping off the stars from his face. They're lines that had a big influence on me, I guess, when I was thinking about songwriting and stuff like that. To see it written in his own writing, slightly childish, that got me thinking about maybe that was part of his appeal, you know. He was one of us in the way that I think that people really loved him. Do you know what I mean? Obviously, this exhibition is a kind of a testament to that. But I remember people, you know, at bus stops with glitter on their faces, you know, running the risk of getting smacked, you know, in the centre of Sheffield. Because they loved David Bowie so much, it kind of altered their whole lives. And there were things, I guess they probably took place in the cities all over the UK, the Bowie night. You've probably been to a Bowie night, I'm sure. So a Bowie night would be like a thing at a disco. They wouldn't just play David Bowie songs all night, but this was a thing that it was like a little beacon saying, okay, all you misshapes, mistakes, misfits, come to this thing and you'll be able to kind of express yourselves. You'll be in this space where you can kind of be yourself, invent yourself in a way. And I think that was a big part of what David Bowie was about. People, although he kind of introduced these kind of sometimes quite esoteric ideas, at the heart of it, people really empathized with him and thought, Dave's one of us. And he provided this kind of umbrella, this kind of safe place for people to kind of try ideas out, try personas out, try sex out, just find who they were. And for me, coming to this exhibition and seeing that writing brought that back in a very immediate way. So I will end on the note, David Bowie is one of us. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
The recording studio for Bowie is like a canvas, and with collaborators, he creates the sonic work of art, the sonic piece of sculpture. I suppose you want to come to an exhibition like this and discover things you've never come across before. It's almost a beautiful thing that his handwriting is almost so sort of naive in a way. It's like my handwriting when I was a kid, and yet he's writing rock and roll suicide.
Time takes a cigarette, puts it in your mouth. You pull on your finger, then another finger, then a cigarette. The water wall is calling, it lingers, then you forget. Oh, ho, 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 you're a rock and roll suicide.
He was a real person that managed to make up this surreal kind of power. When you see the crossings out, you see this process, this making it more fantastic, more extravagant. You know, just using a biro and a pencil, writing in his exercise book. So you see the very beginnings of something that is now so magnificent. And I think the great thing about this exhibition, actually, is that sense of altered histories and other histories that never quite happened. And this way of actually going behind the scenes, if you like, of his imagination, you see the integrity that's involved in making sure that at the end of it, you don't just have a random set of words, you have a coherent story, and something that doesn't necessarily make sense, but that you really feel. And I think that's what he was doing. He was sort of meeting us halfway. This is what I'm going to do. I'm going to put all this together, and then it's up to everybody else to get meaning out of it. I think that's why people love Bowie so much, because he's given them a lot of responsibility in a way to invent in their heads what Bowie is. So he takes it so far, and then everyone else, his audience, his fans, can take it to the next stage.
Really, really cool to see the handwritten lyrics.
It's a bit trippy and amazing.
At one point, they did start off with a bloke called Dave and a pen and paper going like that, and just to see it like that and think, oh my God.
Just to kind of see that creative process was fascinating when you've been so used to hearing these songs over the years.
There was a bit back there where it was the lyrics to Starman, and you could hear the song, and I was just reading David Bowie's handwriting and listening to it. I thought that was incredible.
Just to see the lyrics for Ziggy scribbled out with mistakes and crosses out, it brings a humanity to it all.
bit like walking through Bowie's head, really, isn't it?
Well, we know that Bowie reads a lot. He used to travel on tour with trunks of books, and in fact, he once described himself as a librarian with a sex drive. And it's perhaps no surprise that one of the books to really strike a chord with Bowie was George Orwell's 1984. And in fact, he wanted to make a musical based on the book in the early 70s. And he was already deep into it when he discovered that George Orwell's widow wouldn't let him have the rights to go ahead. So he went away and made his own narrative of a dark and decaying future city called Hunger City, which became the basis of the Diamond Dogs tour. This is Hunger City, with Halloween Jack in the middle, the leader of the pack, a real cool cat, as the song says. And when we were researching the story in the Bowie archive, we discovered that this tour set was first imagined, in fact, as a film set, and that Bowie had made very extensive notes and sketches for a film based on the Diamond Dogs story. So this is Hunger City again here, and it gives you a really vivid sense of the atmosphere that Bowie was after. So it says Hunger City, the future, barren skyscrapers centre around the World Assembly building. And you can see here the Diamond Dogs street gangs starting a riot, it says. And this is Halloween Jack again here on roller skates. Bowie had also made very detailed storyboards, which really show the scale of his vision. And we really wanted to bring this project to life because even though the film was never made, it tells you such a lot about the vision behind the Diamond Dogs tour and what a creative powerhouse Bowie is. So our designers animated the storyboards following Bowie's original instructions and combined it with the never-before-seen bit of footage of Bowie making a demo of the film in the Pierre Hotel in New York.
And in the death, as the last few corpses lay rotting on the slimy thoroughfare, the shutters lifted an ancient temperance building high on Poacher's Hill, and red, mutant eyes gazed down on Hunger City. No more big wheels. Fleas the size of rats sucked on rats the size of cats, and 10,000 peopleoids split into small tribes, coveting the highest of the sterile skyscrapers like packs of dogs assaulting the glass fronts of Lovely Avenue, ripping and re-wrapping mink and shiny silver fox, now legwarmers, family badge of sapphire and cracked emerald. Any day now, the gear for Diamond Dogs.
This ain't rock and roll! This is genocide! As they pulled you out of the oxygen tent, you asked for the latest party.
The storyboards gives you an insight into, you know, how creative and hands-on he was. He was a complete workaholic, he was non-stop.
All the sketches, notes, where he had a complete vision for Diamond Dogs and the Hunger City movie.
Being able to see the storyboards shows a very obsessive need by David Bowie to control every single aspect of that staging.
The Diamond Dog imagery is really astounding because it sort of takes that step of transformation of Bowie's persona one step further.
Procession is assembled here, and Mr. Charge is up there. Badass is over there, Halloween Jack is over there. They're still engrossed in the procession and all the things that have to do with that, playing the music. So Mr. Charge has to do it all himself, and he makes the decisions. Badass is to be released, and Jack to go to the sewers.
By the time Diamond Dogs came about, the manager rang me and said, look, I need some pictures for the cover of the album. So they arrive at the studio, the dog, David and all that. So I photographed the dogs, you know, in all the positions, and then David copied the Polaroids of the dog. I mean, it did work out as a great album cover, there's no doubt about it. And when we finished it all, I thought, well, I better take some shots of him and the dog. As soon as I take one picture, the dog jumps up. I love you so. And everyone reared back, ran off, except for David, who didn't turn a hair. He's very laid-back type of cat. Well, I remember when I saw the contacts for the first time, and I couldn't believe it, because I was frightened the dog had jumped out the frame. But when I saw the shot, I knew I was in business. That got named the second most famous rock and roll picture ever. I forget what the first one was, but that was number 2, and that's good enough for me. He always did something that made a picture. He was a star from the very first time I met him, and he's still a star today.
Stars are never sleeping. Dead ones and the living. We live closer to the earth, never to the heavens. The stars are never far away. Stars are out tonight. They watch us from behind their shades. Brigitte, Jack and Kate and Brad from behind their tinted windows stretch, gleaming like blackened sunshine. Stars are never sleeping. Dead ones and the living.
As a collaborator, Bowie is very generous. You know, he respects different people's roles in a project. There is always a very intense dialogue about everything, about how do we get to the best thing. I worked with Bowie on his past 3 albums. For the latest one, The Next Day, I think he was actually quite courageous to go with a concept which I think a lot of people we knew wouldn't like. What people would have been very happy with is a new picture of David Bowie, looking nice, but we wanted to disrupt that, put something in the way. So that's part of the reason for the white square. But also, he is very much compared to his old stuff. And obviously, he's not that person. The relationship with the musician is a relationship with yourself. And they have no idea who you are. So this was sort of symbolised in the anonymity of the white square as well. You put your image on there rather than actually seeing what's there. We used heroes on the cover for a number of reasons, but actually we went through every single album cover, and you'll see different versions of the cover in the exhibition. I did wonder whether to show this or not, because obviously it changes the context of the final product. Okay, some are obscuring the record cover, but they're doing it with quite strong graphics. We didn't even put his name on it. We used the old name, we just crossed out heroes, but Next Day very simply, because that's all it needed. It's the strength of the idea. With Bowie, it's not a simple thing of, here it is, you just put a white square over it. It was very, very rigorous intellectual thought before we have the final finished album cover.
While working on the exhibition, we've met many people who say David Bowie literally changed their lives. We wanted to illustrate that with the work of a single fan who, at the age of 14, made the most beautiful scrapbooks. That boy turned into a man and eventually to visiting Professor of Fashion at the Royal College of Art. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm delighted to introduce Professor Ian Webb.
I decided that I had to write something down to read out because the memories are really vivid, but the memory is not so good anymore. On the 6th of July, 1972, I saw David Bowie singing Starman on Top of the Pops. It was the night before my 14th birthday, so Bowie was the best present ever. Bowie was all things my life in a cosy West Country village was not. Extraordinary, exotic, and exciting. Overnight, I went from weirdo to Bowie freak, And from that moment, I spent all my waking hours documenting his every elegant move in scrapbook after scrapbook, one of which I'm thrilled to say is included in the David Bowie Is exhibition. Bowie offered an alternative artistic education, and through him I discovered the wonders of William Burroughs, Lindsay Kemp, Lou Reed, Kansai Yamamoto, and Lulu. I painted my nails green and got my mum to knit me sweaters just like his. She even bought me an antique fox fur, which I wore draped over my shoulder, watching Match of the Day with my dad. My poor dad. But really, Dad liked that I was different and stood out from the crowd. David Bowie made it okay to be different and inspired a generation of kids just like me to defy convention, explore new ideas, and challenge the status quo. Known for being a style magpie, the way in which he played with identity and transformation has profoundly influenced my life and my career in fashion. From my desire to not be labelled, to my fondness of spiky haircuts and my love of glitter. David Bowie continues to inspire me, and in this I know I am not alone. Thank you.
This is the face the public wants. An ex-art student from Brixton, whose dad worked for Dr. Bernardo's Homes, has turned himself into a bizarre, self-constructed freak.
Impromptu, isn't it?
6 months, about £500,000 a year. He can afford a personal makeup artist to coat his nails in silver. Not only the young have come to ogle at Bowie, so have members of a pensioners' club from Newcastle.
We've never seen anything like this before.
Haven't you?
No.
Do you get nervous still? Do I get nervous still? Yeah, joking, yeah.
What's that man? Oh, honey, what's that man? Heaven loves you.
This section of the exhibition deals with Bowie's impact, and everything you see here has been censored at one time or another. Bowie doesn't tell us what to do, but he does lead by example, and he has throughout his career challenged convention, challenged the status quo, and through that he's promoted freedom of expression. In 1972 he declared that he was gay and always had been. That was quite a brave and surprising thing to do, particularly when he had a wife and child, and it shows a subversive and rather playful attitude both to truth and to the media. These costumes here are from his androgynous phase. He wore them for the 1980 floor show, which was done at the Marquee Club, but it was done for American television. It was actually the last appearance of Ziggy Stardust. And this one here actually had a third hand on a crotch area, but the American television company asked for that to be removed, not realising there was nothing underneath. So they took that off, and they then had to rig up these gold leggings to make it decent again. Moving along, we have this costume showing that long after that phase, he was still playing around with those ideas. This is a classic Thierry Mugler suit, but he's wearing it with Catherine Hamnett stilettos and an earring by Vivienne Westwood, showing that he was still engaging with those kinds of ideas. And then up here from 1979, we have the Boys Keep Swinging video. It was the first collaboration he did with David Mallet, who he'd go on to do Ashes to Ashes with. And actually on this song, they did change instruments as the Oblique strategy cards had instructed them to. He wanted them to sound like a teenage band, and so that's what they did. But in this, he plays a sort of Jack the Lad, but he also plays these three women in drag, and he finishes the video with this gesture where they sort of rip their lipstick off, which was borrowed from drag queens that he'd come across in Berlin, and that proved too much for RCA America, and it wasn't distributed there.
What's her name? What's her name?
In 1976, to escape the pressures of the music business, drugs, and the media celebrity circus in Los Angeles, Bowie left America and moved to West Berlin, then still in the front line of the Cold War, a divided city marooned in communist East Germany. It gave him a space to clean up, to find new energy and to develop new musical ideas. And it was also a place to explore an older, grittier, multi-layered culture amongst the weeds and ruins. Brecht, cabaret, expressionism, sausages and beer, all in the shadow of the Berlin Wall. It was 14 months of intense music making with Tony Visconti, Brian Eno and Iggy Pop, and which gave birth to, as an anchor point, to a trilogy of groundbreaking albums, Low, Heroes and Lodger. The Berlin period was such an extraordinary experimental and productive period for David that we decided to create a special area in the museum exhibition to create the spirit of Bowie's Berlin.
The last time you saw me was in Los Angeles, wasn't it? One of the worst periods of my life, I think. I got into a lot of emotional and spiritual trouble there. And so I decided to split and discover new ways of relating to the music business, per se. I wasn't sure exactly what I was in it for anymore.
He wanted to be no one, in a way, strip everything away, develop a new form of David Bowie, a new form of character, by going back to nothing. The idea of Berlin as a form of therapy, that privacy, I think, the sense that he could do things for their own sake, not worry about the expectations of people. And he returned to his painting, quietly expressing, you know, other troubled feelings through painting and through connecting with that history of expressionist art that he loved. And the room offers two views of Berlin. You know, there's the Berlin that really was. There's also Bowie's Berlin, what he invented and what he added to the myth of the city as well. And I guess the city gave him an opportunity to join in with some of his favourite artists and musicians. You know, you imagine Bowie and Iggy travelling around, visiting strange clubs. It's a kind of Dada Rat Pack in a way. You know, he became as much a part of Berlin as any Berliner.
I just needed a positive decision to only do what I want to do and not do things for the sake of what either David Bowie or whoever I was playing last time, Thin White Duke or something, was expected to do.
He has many double acts, but one of them is with Brian Eno. And Brian Eno has sort of immersed himself in German music. And he kind of advised Bowie as well. And I think it triggered great delight because he needed new stimuli, new source material. And he found it with a lot of this great German music, the pulses, the atmospheric quality of it. Some of the most innovative music started to happen using electronic machinery. At the time, this was the most advanced form of machinery to create otherworldly sound. It kind of makes me speechless in a way. I can't quite believe it. There should have been more kind of awe about it, almost like it needed its own room. The first release from this period, Low, you know, was loathed by the record company because there was the manifestation of him ducking his successful career. He could have become an international crooning pop star, a Billy Joel or something. And he gave them, you know, something that to them felt like Frank Zappa. So he made a lot of very brave, bold decisions in a way. But it was important that he had this recalibration of his pure artistic impulses that the fame in the early 70s could have destroyed.
Can I help?
Yes? So, what to serve this?
Where'd you get this ring?
It's mine. My wife gave it to me. Look, the initials are on the inside. Yes?
T.J.N. Do you have your ID?
I'm British. I have a passport.
Thomas Jerome Newton.
What's her name? What's her name?
David's appeared in over 20 feature films, starting with The Man Who Fell to Earth, released in 1976. And so to talk about Bowie on the big screen, we have the privilege of meeting film historian Sir Christopher Frayling.
Thank you very much. In the film business, there's a famous saying that Hollywood discovers its actors in the gymnasium, whereas British filmmakers find their actors in drama school. And the thing about Bowie is that he didn't come from either tradition. He came to film through mime, through live art, through makeup, which he first learned with artist Lindsay Kemp in the late 60s. And above all, he came to it through his own performance style as a musician, the way he moved and all the parts that he invented for himself. And the fact that he was so very photogenic, of course, helped as well. And he'd wanted to act in films from very early days. Even that name, Bowie, referenced the Richard Widmark character in the film The Alamo with his Bowie knife. And of course, when Bowie found his voice, he owed a lot to the films 2001: A Space Odyssey and A Clockwork Orange. But it was only with The Man Who Fell to Earth, directed by Nicholas Roeg in 1976, that he launched himself as a truly distinctive figure on the film landscape. Thomas Jerome Newton, the alien in a natty black suit, which turned out to be his defining role. Bowie's most memorable screen appearances, I think, the parts he chose after that, tended to be mirror images of his music career. There was The Hunger in his vampire phase. There was Labyrinth with its fairy tale alternative universe. Basquiat, in which he played Andy Warhol. Perfect casting, where he wore Andy's wig and clothes and even carried his handbag. It's a surprising number of films for a rock musician in a career that's always juxtaposed showbiz and the avant-garde in unexpected ways. But The Man Who Fell to Earth remains the Bowie performance as an alien from a dying planet who comes over to corporate America. Director Nicholas Roeg has said that when first he met Bowie in New York, Bowie just walked towards the part. And amazing as it now seems, he actually wasn't the first choice. Roeg originally wanted the almost equally surprising, non-acting, 6'9" tall science fiction author Michael Crichton, the man who later wrote Jurassic Park, but Crichton lost his nerve. The idea was to cast someone that the public would accept immediately as an alien from another planet, rather than an actor covered in latex, which is the usual method, and it never works. So Bowie was chosen because of his non-matching eyes, because of his skeletal frame, because of the graceful way he moved, because of his complexion, because of his androgyny, and the association in the public mind already with space oddities of various kinds. He really made you believe that he dropped in from another galaxy, just like his public image. Now, most pop stars in films are just an embarrassment. We've all seen them. But Bowie, at his best, I think, contributed his own brand of star quality to the movies. And when asked about how he rated his own acting career, he once said, characteristically, "I took you in, didn't I? I rest my makeup case." Thank you very much.
Well, we're in the cinema area. We created a cinema so you can sit down for 20 minutes or so and watch clips from a whole series of David's films. And then around that, we've created some exhibits about some of them in more detail. This is a poster from Labyrinth. I guess we wanted to focus on Labyrinth because it's the film made in 1986, which put a whole new generation of younger people to get interested in David's work. It's the story of a young girl growing up into adolescence, and we've got some of the early storyboards here which show the shocked reaction of the girl to Jareth the Goblin King, which is the character that David played. And we've also got some of the props. This is the famous crystal ball that David used for looking into the future and for altering events. For me, one of the nicest things is this letter from Jim Henson when they were starting off the film. It says, "Dear David, this is the present shape of the script. It is still rough and needs quite a lot of polishing, but you can see where we're going. I'm looking forward to hearing your reactions. You will be wonderful in this film. Sincerely, Jim." And I think it gives a nice feeling of the relationship between them and the very sort of positive way that they work together.
Sarah, go back to your room. Play with your toys and your costumes. Forget about the baby.
I can't.
I've brought you a gift.
What is it?
It's a crystal. Nothing more. But if you turn it this way, look into it, it'll show you your dreams. Do you want it?
Well, in this next part of the exhibition, we're dealing with performance, live and in video. This is the video section. Bowie, of course, has been extremely active in video for a very long time, long before people really think video was around. In fact, in 1969, he made a half-hour promo 6 months before he actually had a hit single. So I think that shows us how far ahead he was. And over there, we have a whole piece on life on Mars. We have the Mick Rock video, which still looks incredibly modern and as good as it did when it was made. The pale blue suit, which was later modelled by Kate Moss and apparently had to be let out for Kate Moss, which just goes to show how incredibly slim Bowie was. And then coming across here, we have the Pierrot costume from the Ashes to Ashes video of 1980.
Ashes to ash and fun to funky. We know Major Tom's a junkie, strung out in heaven's high, hitting an all-time low.
And really excitingly, we have these storyboards, which we found in the archive, which show what he took to David Mallet, who directed it with him, and what he asked for. And a lot of the key features that you see in the eventual video, such as the solarization and the sort of surreal effects, are already discussed in these storyboards. And down here, you can see the figure of the Pierrot and the old lady walking along the beach. And that, of course, is a reprise of Major Tom, and it put the lid on the 1970s for Bowie and launched him into the new decade.
David Bowie is everything.
David Bowie is everywhere.
David Bowie is ever-changing.
The ultimate chameleon.
David Bowie is his own masterpiece.
Magical.
Magnificent.
Continuously fascinating.
David Bowie is my football team.
David Bowie is what every other artist would like to be.
David Bowie is a pioneer.
A genius.
A hero. My hero.
David Bowie is God.
David Bowie is mine.
Now the ship breaks and snarling as they stumble across the road. But the day breaks instead, so you hurry home. Don't let the sunlight blast your shadow. Don't let the milk flow mind to mind. They're so natural, religiously unkind. Oh no, love, you're not alone. You're watching yourself, but you're so unfair. You got your head on time to love. Pretty far can only make you care. Oh no, love, you're not alone. No matter what or who you've been, no matter when or where you see, all the knives see the lacerate your brain. I've had my share, now I'll help you with the pain. You're not alone. Just give me your hands, 'cause you're wonderful. I said, give me your hands, 'cause you're wonderful. Give me your hands. Cause you're wonderful. Give me your hand. Cause you're wonderful, baby. Hey.
So you've just seen David performing in one of his most famous creations, Ziggy Stardust. David Bowie is one of the greatest performers in the world, and he always said that he wanted his music to look like it sounds. Around us now are scenes from Diamond Dog's tour of 1974. David drew together a stellar group of designers and musicians to create the first example of total rock theatre. Melody Maker at the time said, "This is a combination of contemporary music and theatre that is years ahead of its time, the most original spectacle in rock."
We wanted to make absolutely sure that no visitor would leave the exhibition without having realised quite how amazing David Bowie is live on stage. As one critic said in 2003, he brings more charisma to a single song than most performers manage in an entire career. So here, around me, we use giant projection screens to evoke the raw emotion of a live David Bowie gig, the same emotion that tens of thousands who attended Glastonbury in 2000 would have felt when Bowie was headlining there.
I'd just written this one the first time I played Glastonbury in 1971.
I just wanted to be a better man. Time may change me. I can trace time.
We're now in the final section of the exhibition, and this is where we really go back to the title of the exhibition, David Bowie Is, looking at his cultural significance now. It's where we are now. Bowie himself operated rather like a search engine, pulling in ideas from all over the place before putting them out to his public. We're now looking at where the influence that he's created is going out to. There are obvious examples in music and in fashion. But it goes way beyond that. We've got Michael Clarke in choreography, computer avatars who look just like Bowie. There's even a spider, Heteropoda, David Bowie. Hardly a day passes without one seeing something that relates to the rich body of work that he's given us and that creative people are taking on into the wider world.
The starting point for Come Being a Gone was Heroes, the video. I wanted to use that in some way. Such a powerful video in itself, such a powerful song. David Bowie made dance relevant to me. He had an understanding of how to make a whole persona work. You put on a costume, you can become something other than yourself. That ability to surprise, challenge, he raised the level of what any artist could hope to achieve. Well, it's wonderful to see him being recognised in the way that he is, because he's a key figure in the lives of so many artists that I know who just wouldn't be the people that they are without his work. So that's his legacy, I guess.
If you Google David Bowie, there are tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of images, and you hardly find a single one where he doesn't look brilliant. Well, I think he was the greatest self-image maker of any rock star ever. The photographic images of Bowie were so perfect for their time that they mark out decade after decade of life. They haven't really aged. They just look like very strong images. I love the picture of him standing as a very young man on the Trans-Siberian Railway. I love that picture. Artistically, he has incredibly strong fingerprints. What we see is what he wants us to see, and that's what we remember. All these images have made him so powerful as a character in our psyche. And I think that when the history of rock music and the history of style and the history of fashion is written even in 100 years' time, It's inconceivable that there won't be dozens of mentions of David Bowie in the index. For all time, I think, an incredibly potent force.
What's the name? What's the name?
To highlight that David Bowie really is all around us, we're delighted to be joined this evening by Turner Prize winner, creator of this year's British Pavilion at the Venice Biennale. Ladies and gentlemen, the artist Jeremy Deller. Welcome.
Thank you. Good evening. I've been obsessed with the Bowie song, The Man Who Sold the World, for years and years. There's a real sense of magic and mystery to it that's quite hard to define. And for an artist, when something's hard to define, it's quite good to work with. It gives you a good space. The lyrics have like a series of riddles. They have a biblical feel to them. And I loved the imagery of the line, "I searched for form and land, for years and years I roamed." That, for me, gave images of an ancient image of a prophet in the wilderness or a people trying to find a home. So I knew at some point I would work with this song somehow. And this year, as part of the British Pavilion in Venice, I made a cover version of the song using a steel band, which I hope brought out the essential moodiness and epic quality of the track. So I think all art, in some sense, is a cover version of what has gone before. And for me, this exhibition is as much about the influence of culture and music and art upon us as a society and on an individual as it is about David Bowie. And I imagine and hope that plenty of young people who have seen this exhibition have had their minds blown in a similar way to kids that had theirs blown in 1972 and 1973 when Ziggy landed in their town. Thank you.
Well, for the final exhibit, we asked the artist Paul Robertson to come up with a summary of David Bowie's career. And somewhat to our surprise, he came back with the periodic table of David Bowie. What he did was he took the thing we probably all remember from our chemistry lessons, and he took all the elements and he's changed it into people who either influenced David or who David's influenced in his career. I suppose if you just take this section here, which are the noble gases in the real periodic table, there's Andy Warhol, J.G. Ballard, John Peel, Carl Jung, Marshall McLuhan, William Burroughs, and finishing with David's wife, Iman. And at the top, we've got the people that have influenced him, Bob Dylan, John Lennon, Elvis Presley. And as you move down, it moves into the people that, in turn, Bowie's influenced: Lady Gaga, Boy George, Madonna. And this has worked really well with visitors. We get lots of visitors coming up here and having real arguments about whether this person ought to be in it. People obviously have very, very strong views on current artists. And I guess right down at the bottom, of course, in the same way that new elements are discovered every so often, as David's careers go on and time passes, there'll be more artists and more performers to be added onto this table. But I think as a summary of David's career, it's quite an extraordinary achievement, and I think it's a memorable end to the exhibition.
I hope that visitors to the exhibition see that he was, and is, a really considerable genius who was worthy of their fandom.
When I walked through the exhibition, it was like seeing not only eras of Bowie, but I could directly relate to the era that I was living in at the time. So it did have a very emotional connection for me.
Who could do all this in a lifetime? It's just so crazy. I mean, he's not even dead.
Me and David Bowie, we've been together for, musically, for about 39 years. And it was getting a bit like a stale marriage. So coming in here today has brought it alive for me again.
The way that they've created this exhibition has touched on everything that David Bowie has ever touched upon himself. It really is a testament to what a wonderful cultural icon he has been for the last 40 years.
Seeing all this under one roof is really going to be a memory that I'll take to my grave.
There's so much to take in and so much to absorb, and it really does feel like you've lived a little bit of his life in a very weird way.
I'd like to put the whole exhibition in a little kind of iPad and swipe it.
He is the greatest pop star that's ever been, and this exhibition has only kind of amplified that, and I wish this was as permanent.
I just want to go home and write my own songs now because he makes it seem so easy.
Before I came, David Bowie was all up here, and now he's a lot closer to me, and the only thing missing now is seeing him. That's the only thing that's missing.
For us, it's been incredibly rewarding hearing these and many other personal responses to David Bowie is. And visitors have brought in many David Bowie objects, including one wonderful example I've got here. This is actually David Bowie's school report from Bromley Tech. And in year one, it says, quiet and reliable worker. But if one flips over to the back and reads year 5, his teacher describes him as, quote, a complete exhibitionist. The teacher then goes on to say, if he was capable of continuous effort, his ability would have been put to better use. I think this exhibition shows that David Bowie clearly took this advice to heart.
It's been such an exciting opportunity to work at this exhibition at the V&A. The V&A was set up to inspire creativity, and there can be few more inspiring stories than this one. In fact, it's hard to think of another artist in our time who has the breadth, the vision and influence that we can see around us here. I expect there will be another wave of David Bowie music, imagery and ideas after what we've seen here, and also, of course, with Bowie's continuing work.
That, I'm afraid, is the end of the evening. As you can see around us, we've got the packing cases because the exhibition is now going on an international tour, starting in Toronto, Canada, then going to Brazil next year, then Chicago, and then coming back to Paris and Europe in spring 2015. We've only been able to dip into a little bit of Bowie world tonight, a world which began a few months before President Kennedy's assassination in 1963, which saw the fall of the Berlin Wall and the new millennium. Bowie's seen the arrival of rock and roll, rhythm and blues, rock, glam rock, punk, hip-hop, garage, and everything in between. Fashions have come and gone, but David continues doing what he's always done, looking around him, writing songs and recording, and encouraging people to look around themselves at the world, to imagine the ordinary as exceptional, and to ask who they really are.
Thank you so much for coming tonight. We'd like to leave you with one of Bowie's great performances of Heroes. It's a performance he did 6 weeks after the 9/11 tragedy in a benefit concert to 20,000 emergency workers and the family and relatives of those who died. Here he is at Madison Square Gardens. He dedicated it to his local fire station in Soho, New York. David Bowie, showman, shaman, performer, singer, artist, superstar. You choose.